In the small town of Redwood, tension dragged on day after day. In Margaret's house, an elderly woman trapped in a silent nightmare. Her daughter-in-law, Vanessa, seemed to find pleasure in constantly humiliating her, making her life a living hell. The most painful part was the weakness of her son, Samuel, who watched it all without lifting a finger to protect his mother. The threat of living with a bitter and cruel woman became increasingly tangible. Every day, a sense of danger hung in the air, as if the house was about to be taken over by an imminent invasion, but no one seemed willing to act. The secrets Margaret kept in her heart were many, but the greatest of all was the fear that silently dominated her. She knew her son was nothing more than a pawn in Vanessa's hands, being manipulated by her, unaware of how much he was allowing his own dignity to be destroyed. The feeling of despair grew as time passed, and the woman knew that at any moment she could have an internal confrontation with her own limitations. Her patience was on the verge of collapse, and the tension in the house became increasingly unbearable. It was as if the weight of the world was on her shoulders, but Margaret didn't know how long she could bear it. Vanessa's harsh words echoed in her mind, leaving her without the strength to react. The fear of humiliation dominated her, and moments of peace seemed increasingly distant. However, with each insult, she wondered, how long could this situation continue? The future seemed uncertain, but she was beginning to realize that perhaps the time to act had finally come, and the decision she made could change everything, even the fate of the family itself. Another day's meal seemed to drag on in Margaret's house, but tonight something was different. Vanessa, with her fake smile, cast venomous glances as the food was served. The moment Margaret began to sit down, her daughter-in-law, without warning, spilled red wine over the elderly woman's impeccable dress, leaving the table in an icy silence charged with tension. Margaret's humiliation was palpable, and Samuel's complicit gaze was nothing more than a portrait of a man imprisoned by fear and manipulation. It was a true invasion of her dignity, an emotional battle that Margaret didn't know if she could face. Vanessa didn't stop there. Her sharp words cut like knives, and each comment about Margaret's efforts in building the house seemed to have the sole purpose of belittling and devaluing everything she had achieved. The woman who had spent years of her life building, caring for, and maintaining the home now found herself being destroyed by her own family. The feeling of threat seemed to materialize in those moments, as with each word of contempt, Margaret felt more trapped, smaller. The table, which should have been a place of unity, became the stage for a silent war, where the only loser was family love. However, what no one knew was that something was forming inside Margaret. Although the pain of the moment was unbearable, there was a flame that was beginning to grow within her. With each insult, the fear of losing another battle began to give way to a growing resolve. She knew that confrontation was inevitable, but when would it happen, and who would initiate it? The elderly woman felt that something bigger was coming, and even in the face of humiliation and tension, something told her that perhaps, just perhaps, the end of that cycle of pain was closer than she imagined. Margaret sat alone in her favorite armchair. The silence surrounding her was heavy, almost oppressive. She thought about Vanessa's words, the daily humiliations, and above all, Samuel's abandonment. Everything she had built throughout her life seemed to have been annihilated before her eyes, and the fear of defeat was as great as the fear of never being able to change her reality. But in that moment of pain, something inside Margaret began to shift. Instead of bowing to the pain and fear, she started questioning her own story. How could she allow her life to be consumed by this cycle of emotional violence? It was a moment of deep reflection, where Margaret realized that her dignity could not be reclaimed passively. She wasn't willing to spend the rest of her days being humiliated and ignored. The threat of more years of suffering seemed as real as the secret she kept, but for the first time in a long while, a sense of power was growing within her. This suffering had accumulated for so long that there was no turning back. Something had to be done, and Margaret knew she would be the one to take the first step, even if it meant heading towards a confrontation. But for that, she needed more than courage. Margaret felt that her house, her home, her history were in danger, and she couldn't allow the sacrifice of a lifetime to be in vain. She decided it was time to seek help. to act, to face the fear that tormented her. It was a risky decision, but one that would undoubtedly change the course of her life. What she didn't know was that this decision would bring to light more secrets than she could imagine, and her story was about to take a completely unexpected turn. While the atmosphere in Margaret's house became unbearable, a neighbor, Carmen, watched silently with an attentive and concerned gaze. She knew about the humiliations the elderly woman suffered, but didn't know how to intervene directly without putting her own safety at risk. However, seeing Margaret increasingly fragile, Carmen could no longer keep quiet. One night, without warning, she picked up the phone and made a secret call to Roque, Margaret's absent son, who lived in a distant city. She knew it was risky, but felt the situation had reached a critical point. Carmen told Roque everything: the constant humiliations, the psychological abuse, Samuel's indifference, and the threat that without help, Margaret would end up succumbing to a life of endless suffering. She could no longer stay quiet, knowing that the risk of a tragedy was approaching. The fear that the situation would worsen each day weighed heavily on Carmen's heart. She knew she needed to act quickly before it was too late. Roque, in turn, was shocked by the gravity of things, but a sense of tension began to take hold of him. Something needed to be done, and he knew that for this he would need more than words. He would need action. Roque didn't hesitate. He decided to gather a few trusted men and set off towards Margaret's house. The plan was simple, but the action was charged with mystery. What would he find there? Vanessa's threat seemed much greater than anyone could imagine, and as Roque's journey neared its destination, the danger of a confrontation with the woman who had destroyed his mother so much grew. The tension in the air was palpable. Roque didn't yet know what the outcome would be, but something inside him said that this moment wasn't just a family gathering, but a clash of forces that would forever change everyone's fate. Night had fallen, and Margaret's house, normally quiet, now seemed like a fortress waiting to be invaded. When Roque arrived with his men, the tension became tangible. 3 black pickup trucks appeared on the deserted road, their lights shining like an omen that something big was about to happen. The scene was almost cinematic, the sound of doors slamming, the weight of boots pressing on the ground, and the whisper of the wind that seemed to murmur a message that the confrontation was about to begin. The threat that something irreversible might happen hung in the air, but at the same time, there was a sense of relief. The decision had been made, and the moment of truth had finally arrived. Margaret, from inside, looked out the window and saw the pickup trucks parking in front of her house. Her heart raced, mixed with a feeling of fear and hope. That unexpected arrival, charged with an almost palpable suspense, brought with it the certainty that the situation had escalated into something much bigger than she could have predicted. Roque, with a look of determination, got out of the truck and approached the house. The tension between him and Vanessa was imminent, but Margaret didn't know if she was ready to witness the confrontation. However, she knew something needed to be done, and that this could be the turning point. Roque approached the door, and the sound of the doorbell echoed through the house like a warning that the night was about to change forever. The arrival of the black pickup trucks, which initially seemed like a threatening invasion, was transforming into a symbol of resistance. It was the first step for the truth to be revealed and for the confrontation with Vanessa to finally happen. The mystery of how it would all end was about to be unraveled, but before anything else, the secrets of Margaret's house needed to be exposed to the light, and the tension in the air had never been so thick. Roque entered the house with unwavering determination, his footsteps echoing on the floor like an imminent threat. Vanessa, seated in the dining room, looked at him with a sarcastic smile, unaware of what was about to unfold. She didn't believe anyone could challenge the power she held over Samuel and Margaret's house. However, the arrival of Roque and his men placed a silent pressure on her. The environment, which before seemed to dominate the situation, now became a stage for confrontation. The tension was almost unbearable, as if each second was a countdown to the moment of revelation. Roque didn't hesitate and firmly exposed the truth to Vanessa, making it clear that she would no longer be able to manipulate the situation. The woman, accustomed to being in control, tried to justify herself, the word sorry about to escape her lips, but reality was relentless. The lies Vanessa had woven for so long began to crumble, and she was forced to to face her own mistakes. In a confrontation of words, fear and guilt intermingled, and Vanessa found herself facing the danger of losing everything she had gained. The threat of being exposed as a villain finally materialized, and the shock of seeing the truth emerging was visible in her eyes. The revelation was more than a simple confrontation. It was a dismantling of the empire of lies that Vanessa had built upon the family. As she tried to resist, the reality of betrayal became more evident with each word. The danger of being unmasked, of seeing her secrets exposed, hung in the air, and Vanessa didn't know how to react. But there was no turning back. The confrontation was happening, and Margaret, with a heavy heart, knew that the moment to face the truth had finally come. The woman who had once been so powerful was now completely vulnerable. What would happen next? Samuel, who had remained silent until then, couldn't take it anymore. Seeing his brother Roque face to face with Vanessa, fear and confusion took over him. His world collapsed in an instant. He knew deep down that his wife had done something irreparable, but the direct confrontation with the truth was too much for him to bear. The tension between the two brothers was palpable, as if the ground was about to give way beneath their feet. Samuel, weak and manipulated by Vanessa for so long, didn't know how to react. His heart was racing, but at the same time, there was a sense of guilt that paralyzed him. Threatened by the truth, he searched for a justification for his actions, but the words simply wouldn't come. Roque, with the calmness of someone who had finally found his voice, looked at his brother. He knew that Samuel wasn't guilty of everything, but his failures, his omissions, also made him responsible for much of Margaret's suffering. The confrontation between the brothers was now inevitable, not just because of what had happened, but also because of the unspoken words, the truth hidden for so long. Samuel tried to defend himself, his words laden with regret and fear, but Roque could no longer allow this to continue. The moment was now. Samuel's tears, those of a man torn between what he knew and what he feared, showed the weight of guilt he carried. It was hard for Roque to see his brother in that state, but he knew that the only way to heal was to face the pain once and for all. The tension between them increased, as if the air was charged with electricity. Roque wanted Samuel to understand that he wasn't alone, but that the path to redemption would only be possible if they faced the truth together. Samuel's desperation only grew, and the weight of regret seemed to crush him. Deep down, they both knew that this confrontation would define, once and for all, the future of everyone involved. But what would happen after so many revelations and so much pain? Margaret, with tears in her eyes and a trembling voice, finally decided to reveal the truth to Roque. She knew this moment was coming, that the secrets hidden deep in her heart could no longer be kept. With Samuel and Vanessa's presence still lingering in the air, she looked deeply into Roque's eyes, and with a heavy sigh, spoke the words he never imagined he would hear. Roque, the man who had always believed he was her biological son, was about to discover that his origin was quite different. He wasn't Margaret's son, but rather the son of Margaret's deceased sister, a story she had carried alone for years, and which now, with the imminent danger of a family division, needed to be told. The truth was even more painful than Roque could have imagined. His biological mother, who died young, had been protected by Margaret from a dark fate. A tragedy had occurred, and in a moment of desperation, Margaret promised to take care of her nephew, who from then on became her son. The fear that Roque would be rejected, that he would learn of his true origin and feel betrayed, had been a constant in her heart for decades. But now, with the confrontation already underway, she knew the truth needed to be revealed, even if it meant risking the family bonds she was still trying to save. Roque was paralyzed. The revelation brought forth a mountain of contradictory emotions. How could he be the son of a woman he never knew? How would this change his perception of his identity? The tension in the environment intensified, now not just from the fear of Vanessa or Samuel, but from the emotional turbulence Roque himself felt. He wanted to understand everything, wanted the pieces of the puzzle to fit together, but he knew it would be harder than it seemed. After all, what did this truth mean end for him and for the family. The future, already marked by pain and secrets, seemed even more uncertain. The night seemed longer than ever as the truth about Vanessa finally unfolded before everyone. Each word, each accusation seemed to weigh like a hammer of justice. Vanessa, who had always controlled everything with an iron fist, now found herself unprotected, exposed, and speechless. The threat of being unmasked was finally materializing. The lies she had woven for so long were being undone one by one, and her reaction was one of pure denial. She tried with all her might to justify herself, but the truth was undeniable. The emotional violence she had caused, the cruel manipulation of Samuel, all of this finally came to light. There was no more running away. As Vanessa struggled in a desperate attempt to protect herself, the authorities arrived, bringing with them the punishment she so deserved. Vanessa's downfall was inevitable, and as she saw the arrest coming, a part of Margaret, who had felt ashamed for so long, seemed to finally find peace. But justice wasn't just a personal victory for her, it was a victory for truth itself. All those years of pain and suffering finally had an answer, and although Vanessa's end was tragic, the peace Margaret felt was undeniable. No longer submissive, no longer silenced, she now felt she had control of her own story. However, the outcome didn't mean that Roque's path would be easy. True justice, he knew, wouldn't come just from Vanessa's imprisonment, but also from facing the wrong choices he had made over the years. He still had to deal with his own betrayal and the choices that had distanced him from the mother who had always loved him. But as he witnessed Vanessa's end, he felt that a cycle had closed. Their struggle, though long and full of suffering, finally reached victory. Now it remained to rebuild what was destroyed and perhaps find a way to live in peace with the scars that life had forced them to carry. And don't forget, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss more emotional stories like this one. Share it with your friends and family.